In that book, Daniel is struggling with the same thing, and his teachers and parents say to Daniel Tiger, "Don't worry, Daniel, grown-ups always come back." And Renee Good dropped off her 6-year-old at school, and she didn't come back.
James Walkinshaw of Virginia recently shared a story about his 5-year-old son at preschool. He described the anxiety a child feels during morning drop-off. He told a story about a Daniel Tiger book where the teachers and parents say that grown-ups always come back. This is a basic promise of safety and stability in a civil society. But for the children of Renee Nicole Good, that promise was broken. Renee Good dropped off her 6-year-old at school and she never came back. She did not come back because of what has been described as the cruelty and the violence unleashed by the current administration. She was killed in Minneapolis. Her 3 children are now without a mother.
And Renee Good dropped off her 6-year-old at school, and she didn't come back. And she didn't come back because of the cruelty and the violence and the recklessness that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem and DHS and ICE have unleashed in communities across this country. That's the human cost of what they've done.
This is the human cost of the current operations within the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We are seeing a pattern of brutality and lawlessness that must stop immediately. The White House is currently claiming that its immigration and enforcement actions are necessary for safety and the rule of law. That is a lie. The White House is claiming that these agencies are operating with professional restraint and clear purpose. That is a lie. The claim being spun by this administration is that they are seeking the truth regarding recent enforcement fatalities. That is a lie. The speaker of these lies is the collective authority of the White House and the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security under Secretary Kristi Noem. They are spinning a narrative instead of getting to the truth.
This administration, this White House down the street, is more interested in spinning a narrative than getting to the truth, refusing to conduct a real investigation.
They are presenting a version of events that ignores the actual violence taking place in American communities. This narrative is designed to shield the administration from the reality of its own actions. It is a narrative that ignores the killing of a mother in Minneapolis. It is a narrative that ignores the fact that law-abiding citizens are now terrified. The lie is defined by the refusal to conduct a real investigation into the killing of Renee Good. The White House is expressing zero remorse for this death.
And senior officials like Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino lead raids in city after city and refer to Americans and protesters as cannon fodder.
The authority figures involved, including Donald Trump and Secretary Noem, have created a system where senior officials refer to Americans as cannon fodder. This is the definition of the narrative being sold to the public. They claim to be protecting the country while their agents pull guns on children. They claim to be enforcing the law while their masked agents throw Americans to the ground in their own neighborhoods. This is not an investigation of facts. This is the construction of a political story to cover for operational chaos. The administration is prioritizing this story over the lives of citizens and the safety of families. They are refusing to provide the truth to the families who have lost loved ones. The forensic evidence contradicts the administration's narrative of law and order. Since Donald Trump returned to office, federal immigration officers have opened fire at least 16 times nationwide.
It's a pattern. Since Donald Trump returned to office, federal immigration officers have opened fire at least 16 times nationwide.
This is a documented frequency of lethal force. The evidence shows that these incidents are happening in city after city. In Minneapolis, this violence resulted in the death of Renee Nicole Good. This proves that the use of force is not an isolated or rare occurrence. It proves that the mindset at the top of the chain of command is translating into lethal action on the ground. The evidence includes reports of masked agents dragging pregnant women. It includes evidence of guns being pulled on peaceful protesters and children. The evidence shows that American citizens have been wrongfully taken from their families. This proves a lack of procedural control and a disregard for constitutional protections. The evidence does not prove that these actions have made communities safer. Instead, it proves that law-abiding citizens and immigrants are now terrified. They are asking if they will be the next person to be beaten or killed by federal agents. The forensic reality is one of spiraling chaos within the Department of Homeland Security.
And expressing zero remorse for the killing of Renee Good. Under Secretary Noem, DHS has spiraled into utter chaos. Guns pulled on kids and peaceful protesters, pregnant women dragged, Americans thrown to the ground by masked agents in their communities, and now the killing of a mother in Minneapolis.
The evidence of 16 shootings in a short period proves a systemic failure in training or a systemic shift in engagement rules. It proves that the administration is not following standard protocols for de-escalation. The evidence of masked agents operating in communities proves a lack of transparency. This lack of transparency is a tool used to avoid accountability for the violence being inflicted on unarmed people. The evidence is clear that the Department of Homeland Security has moved away from professional law enforcement and toward a state of lawlessness. The power and control analysis shows a direct line from the top of the executive branch to the violence in the streets. Donald Trump and Secretary Kristi Noem hold the ultimate power over these agencies. They have unleashed this cruelty and recklessness. The control mechanism is seen in the appointment of officials like Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino. Bavino leads raids in cities across the country. His control is exerted through a specific mindset. He refers to Americans and protesters as cannon fodder. This language is a tool of power. It dehumanizes the people the agency is supposed to serve or process. When a leader views the public as cannon fodder, the agents under his command will act with brutality. This is a top-down mandate of violence. The power is also exercised through the refusal to preserve and release records. By withholding video and records of the Minneapolis killing, the Department of Homeland Security is exercising control over the facts. They are using their institutional power to prevent a full and impartial investigation. This control is meant to protect the officials up the chain of command, including Secretary Noem. The power to drag pregnant women and throw Americans to the ground is a display of unchecked authority. It is a method of intimidation used to silence opposition and terrify communities. The control is not about the law. It is about the assertion of force against unarmed protesters and citizens. The administration is using federal agents as a weapon against the American people. This is a deliberate use of state power to create a climate of fear.
Renee Nicole Good's 3 children are without a mother today. And law-abiding citizens and immigrants across this country are terrified. They're asking themselves, am I next? Will I be beaten, arrested, killed? And as Renee's children, including that 6-year-old, mourn their mother,
the strongest defense argument from the administration is that these actions are necessary for national security and the enforcement of immigration laws. They argue that agents must use force to maintain control during raids and operations. They suggest that the deaths and injuries are unfortunate but necessary consequences of a strict enforcement policy. We can dismantle this argument using the facts and the law. The law does not permit the killing of unarmed citizens like Renee Good. The law does not permit the use of Americans as cannon fodder. Security cannot be achieved through lawlessness. If the goal was security, the administration would not be dragging pregnant women or pulling guns on children. Those actions do not enhance security, they create chaos. The defense of necessity is dismantled by the fact that the administration is refusing to conduct a real investigation. If these actions were lawful and necessary, the Department of Homeland Security would be eager to release the records and video to prove it. Their refusal to get to the truth proves that the defense of national security is a pretext. It is a cover for brutality. The fact that federal officers have opened fire 16 times shows that this is not about specific threats, but about a policy of aggression. The law requires that force be reasonable and necessary. Dragging pregnant women and attacking peaceful protesters is neither reasonable nor necessary under the law. The defense of enforcement fails when the enforcement itself becomes a source of violence and death for law-abiding citizens. Legal education is required to understand the gravity of these failures. Under the law, government agencies must be accountable to the public and to the legislative branch. The Department of Homeland Security is not above the law. There is a requirement for the preservation and release of every record and every piece of video related to use of force incidents. This is a standard procedural requirement for accountability. The law also protects the rights of citizens to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. When masked agents throw Americans to the ground without cause, they are violating these fundamental legal protections. The killing of an individual by federal agents requires a full and impartial investigation to determine if the use of lethal force was justified. The law also dictates that senior officials are responsible for the actions of those they command. This is the principle of accountability up the chain of command. If a commander like Greg Bavino fosters a mindset that views citizens as cannon fodder, the law looks to that leadership for the resulting violence. Secretary Noem has a legal and professional duty to ensure her department does not spiral into chaos. The law does not allow for the weaponization of federal agencies against the public. Protesters have a right to be peaceful and unarmed without facing violence from the state. When these rights are ignored, it is a breakdown of the legal system itself. The demand for justice for Renee Good's family is a demand for the application of the law to those in power. My professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of these officials is clear. Donald Trump and Secretary Kristi Noem have demonstrated a complete lack of fitness for their roles. They have presided over a department that has moved from law enforcement to lawlessness. They have shown zero remorse for the killing of a mother. This lack of remorse is a disqualifying trait for any official tasked with the safety of the public. They are more interested in political narratives than the lives of the people they serve. This is a failure of basic human and professional responsibility. A leader who allows his subordinates to view Americans as cannon fodder is not fit to lead. The responsibility for the 16 shootings falls directly on the leadership. If they cannot control their agents, they are incompetent. If they are encouraging this violence, they are dangerous. The brutality described, pulling guns on children and dragging pregnant women, is the mark of a failed administration. It is the mark of a regime that has lost its moral and legal compass. They have turned the Department of Homeland Security into a weapon. This weaponization is being used against the very people the department is supposed to protect. The fitness of Secretary Noem is compromised by the utter chaos that has defined her tenure. She has allowed DHS to become a source of terror in American communities. The expert authority stack includes the members of the committee calling for accountability. James Walkinshaw is a representative from Virginia who has witnessed the human cost of these policies. He is joined by Ranking Member Benny Thompson. These are officials with the authority to oversee the Department of Homeland Security. They are conducting field hearings in Minnesota to gather firsthand testimony from witnesses. These experts are documenting the violence against unarmed protesters and American citizens. They are the institutional voices demanding a full and impartial investigation. They are the ones who are looking at the records and the video to find the truth that the White House is trying to hide. The authority of these representatives is backed by their duty to the American people. They are focused on the preservation of records and the release of video evidence. They are the experts in legislative oversight. They are identifying the pattern of violence that the administration wants to ignore. When they travel to Minnesota for a field hearing, they are acting as the eyes and ears of the public. They are listening to the families who have been wrongfully separated and to the witnesses of the Minneapolis killing. Their authority is the counterweight to the lawlessness of the executive branch. They are the ones who will ensure that the chain of command, up to and including Secretary Noem, is held responsible. Institutional accountability must now be enforced by the Department of Justice and the courts. The Department of Homeland Security has failed to police itself. It has failed to conduct internal investigations that lead to the truth. Therefore, external institutions must step in. There must be a demand for the release of every piece of video from the Minneapolis incident. The refusal to release these records is an enforcement failure that cannot be allowed to continue. The courts must intervene to protect citizens from masked agents and the use of excessive force. The institutions of our government are designed to prevent the rise of this kind of brutality. The accountability process includes the field hearings in Minnesota. These hearings are a formal step in the process of holding Secretary Noem and Donald Trump accountable. The goal is to bring the lawlessness to a stop. Institutional failure occurs when senior officials can refer to the public as cannon fodder without consequence. That mindset must be purged from the federal government. The Department of Justice must investigate the 16 shootings that have occurred since Trump returned to office. Each of these incidents represents a potential violation of federal law and civil rights. Accountability is not just about one person, it is about the entire chain of command that allowed this chaos to spiral. The procedural consequences will be strict and focused on the facts. The first consequence is the immediate demand for the preservation and release of all records related to the death of Renee Good. This is not a request, it is a demand for transparency that is required for justice. The next procedural step is the field hearing in Minnesota. This hearing will provide a formal record of witness testimony and evidence of violence against unarmed people. These proceedings will document the wrongful taking of American citizens from their families. This documentation will serve as the basis for further legal and legislative action against the Department of Homeland Security. There will be no hope or hype in this process. There will only be the slow and methodical application of oversight. The goal is to learn firsthand what happened in Minneapolis and in other cities across the country. The process will focus on the brutality and the lawlessness that has been unleashed. The consequence for Secretary Noem and other senior officials is a full and impartial investigation into their leadership and their roles in these deaths. The procedural focus remains on the human cost and the demand for dignity and safety in all communities. This is the process of accountability that Renee Nicole Good's family deserves. This is the process that will determine the fate of those who have turned a government agency into a source of violence. The children of Renee Good are left with the reality that their mother is gone. The 5-year-old son of James Walkinshaw is left with a story about a world where grown-ups always come back. But that world is currently being dismantled by the actions of Donald Trump and Kristi Noem. The procedural consequence of their actions is a permanent mark on their record of service. It is a record of 16 shootings. It is a record of guns pulled on kids. It is a record of pregnant women dragged by masked agents. This is the evidence that will be presented in the hearings in Minnesota. This is the evidence that will lead to real accountability up the chain of command. The lawlessness must stop, and the process to stop it has begun. The investigation will proceed. The records will be demanded. The witnesses will be heard. This is how a democracy responds to the weaponization of its own agencies. It does not happen with hype. It happens with a field hearing in Minnesota. It happens with the persistent demand for the truth. It happens by refusing to accept a narrative that ignores the killing of a mother. We will watch the Department of Homeland Security, and we will hold them to the standards of the law. We will not stand by while they continue to treat the American people as cannon fodder. The process of justice for Renee Good's family is the priority. The safety and dignity of all communities depend on the success of this accountability process. The narrative of the White House is collapsing under the weight of the facts. The fact of 16 shootings cannot be spun away. The fact of a mother killed in Minneapolis cannot be ignored. The fact of masked agents attacking citizens cannot be justified. These are the forensic realities that the administration must face. The procedural consequences are the only path forward. The field hearings will expose the truth that the White House refuses to seek. The chain of command will be scrutinized. Secretary Noem will be held to account for the chaos in her department. This is the work of the ranking members and the representatives who are traveling to Minnesota. This is the work of the law. James Walkinshaw's son was told that grown-ups always come back. The government has a duty to ensure that this is true for every family. When the government becomes the reason that a mother does not come back, the government has failed its most basic purpose. The brutality and the lawlessness must stop now. The demand for a full and impartial investigation is the only way to ensure it does not happen again. We are one operation away from the next killing if the mindset at the top does not change. The procedural steps are in motion to force that change. The truth will be released, the records will be seen, the accountability will be real. This is the end of the narrative and the beginning of the evidence.